Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are still on chapter 19, verse 9. We began discussing this yesterday. God says to Moshe, I'm going to speak to you directly regarding the commandments, the two commandments, the 10 commandments. There's different ideas in the commentaries, but the people will hear my words as well, so that they will hear and they will believe in you forever. We mentioned yesterday, the Ibn Ezra says that because not everyone, not everyone was necessarily ready to accept it. Moshe can quote God accurately. The Moshe is an accurate Navi. Who says he's such a great prophet? Who says there's such a thing as prophecy? So now once the people hear the discussion, they'll see with it beyond the shadow of a doubt that Moshe is indeed a prophet. The Ramban is not ready to accept that because the Ramban says, how could the Jewish people not believe in prophecy? Very interesting. So then according to the Ramban, what is the pshat? So we're around halfway through the second Ramban on Pasuk Tes. The beginning words of that Ramban are Bavur Yishma'am B'Dabri Yimach, but we're about 10 to 15 lines in, beginning with the phrase V'anachon be'enai. V'anachon be'enai. I think the idea is Sha'amar Ani bo elecha ba'avyonon. God says to Moshe, I will come to you in the cloud. Shetigash ato el ha'arafel, that you will approach Bavur Yishma ha'am dvari, so that the people will hear what I say. V'yuheim atzmem neviim b'dvarai, they themselves will be prophets with what I say. Lo she'aminu m'pi acherim. These commandments that they'll hear directly from me, they don't have to accept what others say to them as this is what God said. They'll hear it for themselves. In Sefer Tvarim, when Moshe talks about this, he says that God said to me that gather the people so I will share with them my words. So now what does it mean? And they'll believe in Moshe forever. If not, like the Ibn Ezra said, that they'll accept Moshe's prophecy, what does it mean? V'gam b'cha yaminu l'netzach b'chol hadoros. Moshe, they'll believe you for all generations now, meaning, v'im yakum b'kirbam navi o cholem chalom k'negev dvarcha yakchishuhu miyad. If another person presents himself as a prophet, they accept prophecy. But let's say another person presents him or herself as a prophet and says something that goes against what the Torah says, what Moshe had taught in the Torah, they'll immediately discount what this new person is saying. Because they've already seen and heard that you've reached the highest heights of prophecy, and they won't accept a prophet who says something counter to what you say. Okay. We're skipping a few lines. This prophet will hear my words from within the fire, and they'll know that I am God who's speaking with you, and they'll believe in what I, God, say, and in your relaying what I say, the olam, for all generations. So just an interesting Ramban. Okay. Let's jump ahead to chapter 20, verse 2. Obviously, there's a lot that we could talk about with the 10 Commandments. We're not going to spend a lot of time with the 10 Commandments, but I just want to relate two interesting comments from the Ramban on these psukim. The first is, let's just read a pasuk or two. Chapter 20, verse 2. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem your God, that I took you out of Egypt from the house of slaves. Verse 3, you should not have other gods, you should not make idols or molten images, etc. All these verses are in the singular. Now, it's interesting to think about because God is clearly speaking to the Jewish people as a nation. So one could very well pose the question, if God is speaking to them as a nation, why doesn't he speak in the plural? Why does he speak in the singular? So if you look at the Ramban on Pasuk Beis, the last part of the Ramban on Pasuk Beis, it's probably around 8 to 10 lines from the end of the Ramban, beginning with the word v'nemru. V'nemru kol hadibros kulan b'lashon yachid. All of these commandments are being conveyed in the singular. Hashem Elokecha, asher hotzesicha v'lo kasher hischil lahem atem risem im shamoa tishma'u. It's very interesting. If you remember when Moshe first goes up to the mountain, God kind of conveyed to Moshe a general message for the Jewish people in terms of understanding their role and accepting the Torah, etc. And those words were in the plural, you plural. So why now, when God is now speaking really on the next level, why all of a sudden does he shift to the singular? Lahasir, to convey the point, ki kol yachid mehem ye'anesh al hamitzvos, that each and every individual within Klal Yisrael is responsible for observing the mitzvos. Ki im kol echad yidaber, God is speaking to each of them. Ul kol echad yitzaveh, and he's giving commands to each of them. Shlo yachshavu ki achar harov yelech, vayachad yinotzel imoed. You might have thought that God is saying, lahavdol, Rabbi gets up at shul and says, we can't have talking in shul. So, it's like, somebody in the back who says, well, what he means is, generally speaking, there shouldn't be talking in shul. But, if I say a word to my neighbor, what difference does that make? Lahavdol. So you might have thought, if the commandments were in the plural, you might have thought this is a directive to Klal Yisrael, for Klal Yisrael to be God's nation, for the Jewish people to be God's nation. The Jewish nation as a whole have to live up to these edicts. But if a specific individual doesn't, it is what it is. So that's why, says the Ramban, it's in the singular, that God is speaking to each and every one of us. A very interesting point the Ramban closes with, Moshe makes that very clear to them, Parshas Nitzavim. Parshas Nitzavim is right near the end of the Torah. And how does Nitzavim begin? Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. Each and every one of you, kulchem, all of you, are standing before Hashem, your God. Your heads of tribes, but kids also, and water drawers also, everybody. And so the Ramban says that Moshe is really fleshing out the point that God conveyed by putting the 10 Commandments in the singular. That's an interesting thing to think about. Going on to the Ramban on Pasuk Gimel, there's another really interesting just paragraph or two here. It's the end of the Ramban in Pasuk Gimel. It's probably about 15 lines from the end of the Ramban in Pasuk Gimel. The Ramban gives his theory for how Avodah Zarah got started, how idol worship got started. Just an interesting Ramban to think about. Obviously, the one of the commandments is not to have other gods. So, Adam spoke to God. Noah spoke to God. So where did things get mixed up along the way? V'karov be'enai, shehu chalzeh b'dor haflaga, kasher hefitzam Hashem elu aratzos. So the Ramban posits that Avodah Zarah began with the Tower of Babel, when in the aftermath of the Tower of Babel, God spread them out among various lands. So then all of a sudden, people were very spread out, and people in different regions began to develop different ideas about what was powerful. What was the whole goal of the Tower of Babel? You could say a lot of things, but one of the points, says the Ramban, is they wanted to create a force of unity. So the point is, they were going to create this force of unity, and we're all together. But then they all got spread out, and God sort of split them up. And so they all developed their own sort of fuzzy ideas as to what powers in this world were. And each of these groups had false prophets. And they began to develop methods of how they could tell them the future, and each one had their own wrinkle. Because, says the Ramban, and this is a really interesting thing, when we see the verses in the Torah that prohibit, telling future and things like that. So many times we look at those verses and we say, yeah, because those people are crackpots and they don't know what they're talking about and they're crazy. But the Ramban says that's not what's going on. those people in those times, some of them were tapping into real stuff. But God says, the way I want to tell you the future, what I think you need to hear will be through prophets. Don't interact with those things. But the Ramban says, the idea is that there are powers to the constellations and in the sky, and it wasn't crazy. So their idea that God is not omnipotent, that was way off. But attributing force in some way to these different entities is not ridiculous. And some people didn't stop at constellations or stars. They started serving other people. When they saw a person who was so powerful and clearly their star had risen greatly, like Nebuchadnezzar, for example, wow, if this person's star has risen so much in life, if we sign up and we commit to serving him, so our stars will rise also. And then Nebuchadnezzar thought that, like the more people who are into him in some way, so that will elevate his power and his abilities. So says Ramban, that's where Paro's coming from. Paro says, who's this God that I should listen to? You have the famous pasuk in Navi that Paro said, the river is mine and I created it. So what's this all about? Like, how much of an egomaniac can you be? So the Ramban says, no, he's trying to tap into this concept which existed in the world, that every now and then, if you have a person uniquely successful and uniquely powerful, that people began to worship this person. There's interesting things to think about. So we spoke about the Ramban's perspective versus the Ibn Ezra regarding, that the nation will believe in Moshe, what exactly that means. And then we spoke about the Ramban, why the Ramban says that the Ten Commandments are in the singular and not in the plural. We also saw this Ramban that discussed the general progression of Avodah Zarah in the world.